My sister always made it clear that I was not meant to be part of our family. I still remember the cold morning when she told me, "You're nothing to us," and our parents just nodded in agreement. That was the day I realized I could no longer pretend to be happy in a home where I never belonged. I quietly grabbed my coat and stepped out into the chill, leaving behind a lifetime of half-hearted smiles and silent resentments. I had always sensed that I was the odd one out. From childhood, I noticed how my parents shared secret glances with my sister, as though she were their shining star while I was simply there to fill a role. I never let it hurt too much, thinking there was nothing I could do about it. But on the day of the family reunion trip, the truth could no longer be hidden. After my parents left for what they called a special vacation, my phone began ringing nonstop. At first, I almost ignored the calls, but soon, a frantic voice demanded that I answer. When I finally picked up, my sister's tone was icy and unforgiving. "You never belonged here, and now you'll never be welcome again." Her words, though softly spoken, cut deeper than any shouted insult. I could hear that familiar condescension in her voice, a rehearsed mix of false pity and cold determination. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of her weak tea, my mother murmured, "It's for the best," as if my leaving would somehow right all the wrongs. My father barely glanced up from his phone before he grunted his consent. As I listened, I wondered if they had conspired together. The way my sister had practiced those cruel lines, like a seasoned actor perfecting a role, made me see our life as nothing more than an endless rehearsal of favoritism. I smiled bitterly, not out of amusement, but in disbelief at their ease. I threw on my jacket, grabbed my worn bag, and said quietly, "I'll save us all the trouble." With that, I walked out, leaving behind a home that had long denied me the warmth of belonging. My sister's satisfied smirk, my mother's distracted silence, and my father's indifference would echo in my mind for a long time. In truth, I never felt the sharp sting they intended. While my sister craved their constant approval, basking in praise as if it made her perfect, I had spent years learning that being different meant knowing I was not their chosen one. Their love, as I had come to understand, was never mine. It was carefully reserved for the one they celebrated. And honestly, I didn't miss it. I had friends who accepted me for who I was, dreams I wished to chase, and a sense of peace that finally began to grow as I walked away from that toxic routine. That first night away, I stayed with a friend who had always been there for me. Over cheap coffee and simpler words, we recounted the day's events. "Maybe it's time you leave for good," my friend said, half teasing and half serious. We laughed at the absurdity of the whole thing, how my sister, who had always prided herself on being the perfect daughter, could be so quick to cast me aside. Yet beneath the laughter, I felt a strange relief. I had finally escaped the daily drama of a family that loved only one of its own. But even in the quiet moments, the echoes of the past would not let me forget. 2 days after that escape, as I sat on a park bench reading an old, battered book, my phone buzzed insistently. The calls came in one after the other, each one carrying the familiar tone of panic mixed with an undercurrent of threat. I glanced at the screen. It was her. 7 missed calls, each more desperate than the last, until finally I answered, expecting the usual barrage of spiteful words. "Why aren't you answering?" she cried, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. I replied coolly, "I told you before I'm not interested in your drama." "Listen," she insisted. "I'm in trouble now. I need you." I paused, a part of me curious despite everything. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. Her sigh was heavy on the line. "We got mugged. I don't know what to do. Mom and Dad are panicking, and Mike is just lost in his own anger." There was a long silence before she added, "Please, for once, I need you." I hesitated only for a moment. A part of me felt this was exactly the kind of mess she deserved, yet another ploy to guilt me into rescuing her from the chaos she always seemed to create. I suggested lightly, "Maybe you should ask one of your friends, those you boast about all the time. They might know what to do." Her voice turned from pleading to screaming almost instantly, and I ended the call before she could escalate things further. As the day went on, my phone continued to buzz with messages from not only my sister, but also from our parents. The tone was the same everywhere, pleas for help, lines loaded with disappointment and old wounds. They demanded that I transfer money, that I come back, that I help fix the mess that apparently I was supposed to be a part of. I simply laughed at their obvious hypocrisy. How could they beg for help from the one they had already cast out? I shot back a terse text. I'm just your tenant now. I'm not paying for your vacation misfortunes. Then I turned the phone off and let the silence fill the space. The following day, I woke up to just one text from my sister. We're coming home. Thanks for nothing. I stared at it for a long time before simply putting my phone aside. Their problems were not mine to solve. At that moment, I felt lighter, freed from the burden of their constant judgment. However, peace in my new life was short-lived. A couple of days later, as I was preparing pancakes in the small kitchen of the little apartment I'd rented, the phone rang again. This time it came at exactly 10 a.m. I rolled my eyes, expecting another flood of blame, and hesitated before answering. What now? I muttered. Do you really want to stay there alone? My sister asked, her voice dripping with bitterness. What will you do without us? I replied with a calm smile meant to annoy her deliberately. I hope on your trip you take Mom and Dad to a place where they can finally see what a mess they are. Her silence was short-lived. She exploded into a tirade of curses and tears, while my parents' voices joined in, each blaming me, accusing me of abandoning the family. I listened, unmoved, as they regaled me with demands and guilt trips until finally, my sister's husband, Mike, the one person who had been decent enough in our chaotic household, called me with a hint of desperation in his tone. We need you, he said softly. There's something you must know about her. I was taken aback. Mike was always the calm mediator, a quiet observer who never really got sucked into the madness. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. His answer, delivered in a hushed voice, sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a random mugging. I found out she planned it. She gave the money on purpose to cover her tracks, and... He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. I also discovered she's been messing with our accounts, hiding debts and making secret deals. I found it difficult to believe that the same sister I had watched grow up acting like the golden child could be so calculated. Yet Mike's tone and the seriousness of his words made it clear that this was beyond a simple family spat. Are you asking for my help? I pressed, not sure if I wanted to be dragged back in. Mike's silence spoke volumes before he finally said, Yes, but only this one last time. I need you to help expose her before she ruins everyone completely. I took a deep breath. For once, it wasn't about me or the endless cycle of blame. It was about stopping her from hurting the people who still cared about me. All right. I'll see what I can do, I said, though every word felt heavier than the last. The next morning, Mike asked me to meet him at a small diner on the edge of town. As I sat in the corner booth, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, Mike slid an envelope across the table. Inside, I found a stack of documents, screenshots, and bank statements that painted a disturbing picture. My sister had been behind a series of financial scams and even filed a false police report to cover her tracks. My heart pounded as I looked over the evidence. Mike's face, lined with worry and fatigue, broke my reverie. Look, I'm not saying you have to fix everything, but this is bigger than our family drama, he said. She's been using our family like a safety net while she digs deeper into crimes. If you don't help, I'm afraid more people will get hurt. I hesitated. The idea of getting involved again, of stepping back into that familiar role of fixing others' mistakes made my chest tighten. But the righteousness in Mike's eyes, coupled with the clear evidence before me, made it impossible to walk away, this time. Fine, I said, my voice resolute even though my heart thumped loudly. But understand this. I'm doing this for all of us. I'm doing this to finally end the chaos. The plan was simple in theory but complicated in execution. Over the next few days, I collected more pieces of the puzzle. I made discreet phone calls, met quietly with a few trusted friends of Mike's who had seen the darker side of my sister's actions, and even worked with a small-time detective who promised to keep an eye on her. Every step felt like I was finally taking control of my own life, but it also meant facing the family I had once fled. Then came the day my sister decided to confront me again. It happened on a rainy afternoon when I had almost forgotten what her anger sounded like. The door opened abruptly, and there she stood, soaked and shaking, her eyes wild with a mixture of rage and panic. "How dare you?" she hissed, as if accusing me of some unspeakable crime. "After all I've done for you, you turn your back on me and now you're helping to destroy our family?" I met her gaze evenly and replied softly, "I'm not here to help anyone but the truth. You think you can manipulate us forever, but I won't stand by while you hurt the people who cared for me." Her face contorted with fury, and for a moment I saw the vulnerable side behind the mask she wore so well. "You'll regret this," she spat, before storming out into the downpour. That evening, as I sat alone in my small apartment, the weight of what had happened pressed upon me. The irony was not lost on me. A person who had spent years trying to silence her emotions, desperate to be free, now found herself almost compelled to uncover the truth about the person who had betrayed us all. Yet, for the first time, I felt truly alive, aware of every small victory and each step toward reclaiming my identity. A week later, my phone rang just as I was preparing a modest dinner. It was my parents. Their voices, usually so monotonous and devoid of emotion, trembled with worry. "Please come home," my mother pleaded softly. "We have to talk. Everything is falling apart." I listened carefully. I had long since made up my mind, but a part of me wondered if facing them once more might bring some unexpected closure. I told them I needed a few more days, and hung up before guilt could take root. I wasn't returning to that life of silent suffering. My new life felt like a quiet rebellion against a past filled with lies and manipulation. I began to attend small meetings with local friends who had experienced similar family betrayals, finding comfort in shared stories of broken trust and eventual freedom. I even started writing down my experiences, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself that I had survived, and that I was finally building a life based on truth and self-respect. Then, one day, an unexpected call from the police shattered my brief moment of calm. A detective, who introduced himself simply as Detective Cooper, explained that they had opened a case on the financial irregularities linked to our family. "Your sister is a suspect in a much larger scheme than we initially thought," he said, his tone a blend of professionalism and genuine concern. "I need to ask you some questions about her dealings with you and Mike." I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of me was relieved that someone was finally taking steps to uncover the full extent of her actions, while another part was angry that she had dragged me into this mess even after I had made it clear that I wanted nothing more to do with her. "I'll cooperate," I assured him, even though the idea of reopening those old wounds made my throat dry. Over the next few hours at the station, Detective Cooper questioned me about every detail. Each suspicious phone call, every odd transaction, every time I'd sensed something was amiss. He never judged or blamed me. He simply took notes and asked for clarification. And slowly I began to feel that this was not just about my sister's crimes, but about finally holding accountable the family system that had allowed her to run wild. After leaving the station, I walked home under a sky that was beginning to clear. My head swirled with thoughts of what the future might hold. Should I confront my parents about their role in all of this? Or should I continue down this lonely path of truth and self-reliance? In a moment of reflection, I realized that my journey had never been about winning their approval. It was always about rediscovering who I was beyond their expectations and manipulations. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of herbal tea, my phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "We're one step closer to stopping her. I couldn't have done this without you." I stared at the message for a long while, feeling both gratitude and sadness. The realization was bitter. Despite everything, there were still good people in this fractured family who had taken a stand against the cruelty that had once defined our lives. Days later, a tense confrontation unfolded at my parents' house. When they finally returned from their unscheduled vacation, the air was thick with tension as my sister, red-faced and unsteady, glared at me from across the living room. "You betrayed us!" she shouted, her voice cracking with anger. My father's eyes filled with tears as he demanded, "How could you turn against your own blood?" My mother, always the peacemaker, barely spoke, her hands trembling as she clutched a faded photograph of happier times. I stood there, unwavering, and answered simply, "I'm done being part of this charade. I'm not here to mend your broken illusions or to pay for the mistakes that were never mine. I've built a life without your constant reminders that I was never enough." The room fell silent as the truth of my words settled in. Mike, who had come unannounced to speak with our parents, placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's time you listened," he said softly, his tone carrying both regret and hope. That night, after my parents had finally left in a state of grief-stricken confusion, I sat alone in the now quiet house. The silence felt different now, no longer a relief from the chaos, but a somber reminder of what had been lost. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to please people who could never love me the way I needed to be loved. I wondered if, perhaps I'd been too complacent, too forgiving of a system that thrived on favoritism and cruelty. Yet as the moon rose high in the sky, I resolved that I would never allow myself to be a victim again. I started drafting a letter that night, one not of bitterness, but of clarity, a statement of my intent to live on my own terms, without the chains of family expectations holding me back. I wrote in plain words, "I choose me. I choose truth. I refuse to be silenced by the guilt you built around me." I mailed that letter the next morning, knowing that it was not just a farewell, but a rebirth. Weeks turned into months as I slowly pieced together the remnants of my shattered past to create a future of my own choosing. I moved into a small, sunlit apartment far away from the memories that still haunted me. I began to laugh freely again, to fill my days with activities I loved, and most importantly, to trust that true family could be found in the people who cared genuinely and unconditionally. Then, one cool autumn evening, as I was closing the door to my favorite cafe after a long day filled with new beginnings, my phone buzzed once more. It was a simple message from Mike. "Thank you for standing up for what's right. I'm proud of you." I let a small smile break through as I texted back. It wasn't about them. It was about me finally knowing my worth. The echoes of my past no longer held power over me. I realized that sometimes breaking away is the hardest, but it is also the most liberating step. I was free now, not because I had left a family behind, but because I had found the strength to build one anew, one based on respect, honesty, and mutual care. In the end, my sister's attempts to orchestrate my downfall only paved the way for my own independence. I had walked away from the familiar chaos, exposed hidden truths, and in doing so, learned that the only family I truly needed was the one I chose for myself. And as I sipped my coffee watching the sunrise from my new home, I knew deep in my heart that I had finally found peace.